Hello, my name is Neil Bakshi. Welcome to episode 2 of 5 Good Questions. I'm here with Matt Edwards, and we're coming back from Antarctica. And Matt is from the UK. He currently lives in Dubai, and he has traveled to every country in the world except for North Korea. And I'm here to ask Matt 5 good questions about his travels.
Good morning. Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Thank you.
Excited to be part of this interview.
Yeah, this should be a great time. So, my first question for you, Matt, is what parts of the world have you found most difficult or unsafe to travel in?
I would say that the Middle East and West Africa were definitely the most challenging um, for security reasons, um, for instability, and for getting a visa, getting visas. Um, if I had to pick which of those two regions was the most difficult, I would say West Africa. Um, they are logistically difficult to travel around independently, and they have a sense of hostility, I would say, towards tourists. Lots of those countries are very, very closed to tourism, or they feel often that tourists are there to look down look down their noses at people. If I could describe it that way, the uh, security issues can make the travel there very difficult because things can happen at a moment's notice. So you could be on an itinerary driving through Mali, and then the next day there could be civil unrest in the capital, and then therefore you either have to stay in your hotel while things are kicking off and settling down, or you have to reroute somewhere else to ensure that you don't get yourself in a very, very difficult position. Obviously, Western white males, if I could put it that way, are often a target for um, kidnapping or uh, trying to think of the word, exploitation. A number of times I've been stopped for potential bribes. You know, um, if you don't give me X dollars, I'm going to take the passport off you, or you know, they will make it very difficult. So uh, West Africa is definitely somewhere where I would consider doing a group tour, or go with a company rather than travel on my own. Um, so certainly my experiences in Mali, Burkina Faso, Chad, Niger, um, you have to plan these visits very carefully, and you would have to consider going with a reputable firm run by locals that know the situation on the ground, and put security, um, at the top of the agenda when you're moving around. Um, when I went to Niger, for example, I wasn't allowed to leave the capital unless I paid $600 for an armed guard to follow me around. And they're very strict on um, making sure that they monitor where you're going, the routes that you follow, so that they can um, contact your driver and or guide if there is something that they think might be an issue and you're potentially in danger. So, um,
Wow.
but it still wouldn't stop me going to those countries, because actually the people, and the things, the experiences that you can have, and the beauty of the architecture and the temples, and some of the things you're asking me are like you know, I need to write these things down. I mean, I keep logs of my travels through Facebook and Instagram, but I'm actually going to go back now. I've got some time and try and write some of these things down and really um, work through what these experiences have actually meant. Because some people would look at the traveling I've done and think, what? And sometimes I do. I think, what? Well, how did I end up for a week in going around Maui with just a driver and a guide, knowing that there was always a potential to get into a difficult situation that I didn't have any control over. Like I remember arriving in the Central African Republic with a visa that wasn't recognized by the airport that I arrived in. The visa was actually only valid for a land crossing, not for arriving at this airport. So when I arrived, they held me in a room for hours, and no one would communicate with me. I couldn't speak French at all. I didn't have any cellular access on my phone. There was no Wi-Fi, so I had zero contact with the outside world. They could pretty much have done anything, and I wouldn't have been able to do anything about it.
Wow, you're
Do you know
right,
what I'm saying?
completely.
Like my language, I speak, conversational French when I want a pint of beer and some fries,
Sure.
but I wouldn't know how to, converse in anything that would require help. But thing is, this is why I wouldn't go countries like that independently on my own, on my own, because um, luckily, because I was there with a guide, and this company realised that I hadn't left the airport, so obviously then they could start to work out what happened and where I was and why I hadn't come through immigration. Um, but if it wasn't for that, I don't know how long I would have been there for. I don't
Wow.
know.
Yeah, I mean, what? Well,
Do you know what I mean?
yeah, completely. And I'll get into this. This is like the third question I'm going to ask,
Well,
and
well, you
something's
know that
crazy.
question. What was that question that you asked about? What's your
What's
most
the
difficult?
what's the wildest story you've had from traveling?
Okay, so maybe what uh, were there any really difficult? I don't know. Maybe wildest. Maybe change the wording on that so I can say. Well, I'd say two things. One is this: language barrier
Yeah.
can be a massive, make a massive impact on your traveling when you're in situations where you can't communicate with anybody because you don't have the language. And secondly, being careful of being careful ensuring that you know the health risks of the places that you're going, so that you can
Hmm.
either take medication with you or have the proper um, vaccines before you go. Um, you know.
I think that's a great segue because before we started recording this, Matt shared a story with me about traveling through Sierra Leone, a country that I am deeply passionate about to visit. And he was sharing a story about how he happened to contract malaria while in Sierra Leone.
Yeah.
And so I think that was the impetus for me asking him, what was the wildest story you have? So if you want to just share a
Well,
little about
yeah. I
that.
mean, I booked to go to Sierra Leone literally a week before I went. I just thought, I haven't been there. I've got a week off work, and let's just drop a pin. And it happened to land on Sierra Leone, so I just booked
Literally, that's what you did.
literally, and I joined it up with Liberia because they're next door to each other. So I did like 4 days in Sierra Leone and 4 days in Liberia. I flew in one country and out the other, and I got a guide to. I got two guides, one in this country and one in that country, and they drove over the border into Sierra Leone, and the other one drove over the border, and they picked me up. I just got out of one car into the other, just because I knew when I did some overlanding in other countries that they could be the places where you could be intimidated the most to and bribed. Um, Especially thinking back to my experience in with a friend when we crossed over from Senegal into Gambia. Immigration were probably the worst I've ever come across in the world. Um, when we went in to get our visa stamp to move across the border, in this police station on the border, the first thing we saw was a cage with two people in it. It literally, before that we got to the front desk, there were two people in a cage, not much bigger than a dog kennel. It was awful. Like, that was what was on display. The first thing
Wow.
you saw.
Why were they in the cage?
No one would say, but
Oh
they
my
were pretty
lord.
much there, maybe to pass on a message that a subliminal message
Yeah.
that you know, these people aren't to be messed with. But they, you know, they wanted money for us to move across the border, and when we refused to give it to them, they said, well, and they had our passports by then. They said,
Yeah.
well, you're not getting your passport back until you give us X dollars, $50 probably, I think it was 50 or $60. So that took an hour of you know, convincing that um, we had to cross the border. They were awful. I mean, they said, well, no, you're not crossing. We'd already travelled for 7 hours by then at this time overland to get to this border, and it was either pay them or go 7 hours back again. So
You ended
in
up
the end,
paying
we
them.
had to pay them. Yeah,
Wow. There's nothing you can
there
do.
was nothing we could do, but that was also in a time where it was during the COVID period, so we'd already had to time our COVID test and pick up the result and give us enough time to get into the next country
Wow.
before that period of time ran out. And then if we'd had to go back 7 hours and try and get there a different way, we would then have
Timed out on that
timed out
72 hour or
on
whatever
that
window.
window. Yeah, I think it was 24 hours even for that
24.
country. So that was uh, that was another example of where um, that part of the world is particularly difficult, and probably even more difficult if you're overlanding than if you're flying between countries, between capitals. Um, but yeah, so Sierra Leone. Um, I, I mean, I went there. I was in shorts. I was like I went like a holiday maker, not thinking again that it was an issue with malaria. This is another thing that you need to do when you travel, is make sure you know exactly what you're facing, and don't forget that you know there are countries out there that are you know have issues that you might not think about.
Sure.
So I took this boat over to this famous island. I can't think of the name of the island, but it's just really as far south of Sierra Leone as you can go before you cross the border into Liberia. And it was a fantastic place, but it was full of. I could see there were a lot of flies and mosquitoes, but it still didn't. I still didn't twig that they might be the might be the kind of malaria that might cause a problem.
Yeah.
And I was fine for the rest of the trip. And I went back to Dubai, and 2 weeks later, I started to feel sick. But it was COVID style sick.
Yeah.
And when I went to the doctors, they just tested me for COVID and gave me COVID medication. Um, and they didn't consider that I had picked up anything from West Africa either. But then a week later, I got to a point where I wasn't able to function anymore. I literally was finding it difficult to stand up. So I just took myself into a hospital, and they asked me if I'd been to West Africa. Where had I been? I said Sierra Leone, and then they tested for malaria, and they discovered that my blood was 80% parasite. They said that if I'd left it another week, I would have been dead, because my system would have not been able to cope
Sure.
with that level of you know,
Infection.
of infection. Um, so they tried to give me a blood transfusion, and my body rejected that. Um, I went into pre-cardiac arrest, and so they wired me up, and they did all the things that they needed to do. Um, and then, of course, when they discovered that I was um, infected with this malaria, they then couldn't treat me anymore because they have to move you to a tropical diseases hospital so that you're isolated. So they moved me to this government hospital, which um, was like I can imagine a prison hospital would be like.
Wow.
So it's under full guard, along the corridors. Every room has got bars on the windows, and I pretty much was there for 6 days on various drips and whatever care they needed to use, medication they needed to use, and then after that, I was in recovery for about 3 months. So it was lucky. I learned a lesson after all that traveling through all of those countries in Africa. I mean, by then it was 50, probably I think about 48 countries out of 54 I'd been in Africa by then. I finally learned a valuable lesson.
Wow. Wow.
Just be really, really careful.
And knock on wood, as we did
and not,
earlier,
yeah,
last
not take,
and only.
take nothing for granted.
Yeah.
Because you know, it's it was a very interesting travel experience.
Yeah, definitely a
if I put it
wild
that way.
story.
Yeah.
And so maybe after jumping in right away with the first two questions, we'll take a small step back
Okay.
with question number 3.
Yeah.
What inspired you to want to travel the world?
Well, I remember going on a holiday with some friends um, for 2 or 3 years in a row, and it was a typical holiday that you do when you're young and you've got friends and you go to, I don't know, certainly from the UK, you go on a drinking holiday to Spain or to a Greek island. And I got to the end of that holiday and I thought, there must be something different than this, because I enjoy travel, but um, I got to a point where I didn't want to do that anymore. Um, but I actually thought it was quite strange to travel on your own, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I found that a bit weird to begin with. I thought, this doesn't seem, it seems a bit weird. I mean, what type of people travel on their own?
Yep. I've received that a lot when I started traveling alone.
And so I found this company called Trek America. I don't know whether they exist anymore, but they did this tour from New York City up to Quebec in Canada, and it was like 17 days camping. Um, and I took this trip, and it was the most amazing trip. It like completely um, surpassed my expectations. I mean, I love the USA anyway. It's probably up there in the top 5. I met a fantastic group of people, and I still keep in contact with them all, even after all this time, 20 years, and just the scenery and the landscapes and the experience of seeing all these new places that I thought I would never see.
Yeah.
Because when I was growing up, we just didn't travel as a family. We couldn't afford to travel. It was all camping in the UK. Beautiful. I mean, the UK is beautiful, but I didn't go abroad until I was 16. That was my first trip. That was to Florida, but that was Disney and all those
Sure.
kind of things that I also always dreamt about. And after that, I got the confidence to go traveling on my own independently, because I met 20 other people that were in the same position, and that gave me the confidence to travel. And as soon as I got back, I booked the next trip. I think the next trip was Egypt. Um, and I took a trip from Cairo down to Luxor,
Mhm.
and that was amazing as well. That was fantastic. And from there, I started to get really um, passionate about wanting to see the world, but specifically starting with the seven wonders of the world. I think that was my first kind of um, aim, was to see, um, to visit the seven wonders of the world. Obviously, when you see these places and go and visit them and see how jaw-dropping they are,
Yeah.
it then started to pick up, and then I wanted to see, the world on a much wider scale. Um, Now, for the first 10 years of travel, it was mainly focused on what you would call safe areas of the world, places that probably tour companies would go,
Sure.
and you know that there wouldn't be issue. You wouldn't even consider things like security, uh, or that your life might be, you know, facing particular issues. And then I moved to Dubai, and I I joined a group, a meetup group called Trek Up, and they had itineraries for places in the world that I would have never considered visiting ever. All Middle Eastern and African countries. So um, I just picked one, and the first one was Oman, which is not a difficult country,
Right.
um, but it was still starting to move out of my comfort zone, and I went on this trip, and I met many, many, many interesting people, a fantastic group of people. And when I started to kind of interact with these people, I realized that there were people out there that had the same interests as me, to want to see as much of the world as possible, and to explore, and to immerse in myself into new cultures, and see parts of the world that I would never have ever considered seeing. Um, and then from then, um, I, uh, they then put me in contact with other people. There was a group emerging that would go to some of these places together, and then I got I signed up to every passport stamp on Facebook, and that then is the ultimate um, Facebook group for
It's everyone
for
sort of
everywhere. Yeah,
taking each
I
other
think
on
there's
the.
about 20,000 members on
Wow.
there, and that is the group that gave me the inspiration to want to do all 193 UN countries.
And so
Um,
that's what you're at, 193.
I'm at 192. I have one left.
Right.
North
North
Korea.
Korea.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. And that's I would this Antarctica trip was supposed to be the final chapter as a celebration to having completed the 193.
Uh huh.
And unfortunately, um, North Korea is still closed because of COVID. So I couldn't make it fit in. I left a lot of flexibility to go before Antarctica, but it wasn't to be.
Not
So
in the cards
hopefully this
just
year,
yet, but maybe
yeah,
in the future.
yeah. Well, I'd applied for the marathon. They run a marathon in North Korea every year. So I thought, if I can't get in as a tourist, I can get in as a competitor. But they've just postponed that. That was supposed to be in April. So hopefully by the end of the year.
All right. Wow.
Yeah, yeah.
So incredible, incredible inspiration for what was the catalyst for you traveling. And moving on to question 4, what is the single most memorable or euphoric feeling you've had while traveling, and where was it?
You see, that is a. There's so many wow moments, even down to like pulling the curtain, like arriving in Cairo in the middle of the night, and then waking up the next morning to pull the curtains back. The pyramids were there in front of the window of the hotel. I had to shut them again and open them again, just to see if I hadn't like imagined it or dreamt it. I mean, I think walking out onto the deck of a ship, of an expedition ship, and seeing polar bears there in front of the ship. I mean, that question is so, there's so much that you can
And give
that
me
I
a
can say.
give
So
me like a rapid
what's the question again?
it was, what was the single most memorable or euphoric feeling you've had while traveling, and where was it? And
Because you see, I'd say the most memorable, the most euphoric moment I've had just before this trip was swimming with humpbacks in Tahiti. I mean, literally there, and getting that close. It's like when you see a whale-fin from the boat, it doesn't.
yeah,
It's not the same. It's kind of okay, yeah, but I've been like
next to it.
5 meters from them. So when they do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Wow.
So I would say probably that would be one of my most euphoric experiences, having spent years, like doing whaling trips to see them from a boat.
Yeah.
Actually, swimming with them is probably my number one.
Next level.
That's just recent experience.
I mean, one of the other experiences, just that for the audience, that you mentioned
Or
to me before,
seeing polar bears.
yeah, or even you were in a coal train car for 13 hours wearing
Okay.
a mask. Like, some of these things are just
Yeah.
incredibly memorable that you would never
Yeah.
even imagine could
Yeah.
be in a realm of possibility for something or
Yeah.
someone.
Yeah. I mean, getting up close to tigers in India, but having this conversation is sparking things that I you know, I'll have to go away and write my top 10 most incredible experiences in
If
the
you
world,
want.
because you do get blasé about it. You
Which
do.
is crazy. Which is
No,
such
you
a
do. You
yeah.
do get
Yeah.
blasé about it. I mean, so some of them are going to be stereotypical. Like, I mean, just doing the Inca Trail and coming out on the last day
Yeah.
and
Sungate.
seeing, yeah, you do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
that is something that is was incredible. Yeah, polar bears. But if you're going to ask me quickly, then I would probably say
The
my
humpbacks.
most recent one is seeing humpbacks in Tahiti
That
and
video
the
was
Mauritania train.
Mauritania train.
Yeah, there's so much that I could say. Oh, the other thing I really loved was hiking to Angel Falls in Venezuela, which took
Wow.
about 12 hours to get there and back. That was incredible experience that I would recommend anybody to put on their bucket list.
Why was that so amazing?
Just the logistics of getting there. So you could only get there by motorized canoe and hiking. So you go on a boat 2 hours, you pick the boat up, you carry it, then you put it down, and then you go again, then you put it and you carry it down. And then when you get to the kind of the point where you then hike up to see it, I just never thought I would ever go there, because Venezuela is obviously one of the most temperamental countries in the world for traveling. Just because you don't know, you could get stuck there. Suddenly there could be power cuts. It's obviously dangerous as well. Probably the most volatile and dangerous country, certainly in the Americas. So that would be in one of my experiences that I wowed me, because it's always been on my bucket list to go there. Iguazu Falls was jaw-droppingly stunning.
Yeah.
Like I'd never seen anything like it.
Yeah.
Like like it completely surpassed my expectations of what I was going to see. But what I never do is I never spend too much time looking at videos or photos before I go somewhere,
Hmm.
because then it takes the wow factor
Yeah,
away,
the
doesn't it?
magic out of it a little
Yeah.
bit.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I remember that. So I don't do that.
Yeah.
I think Euphoria is about that first that first sighting or that first thing that suddenly comes into view, and I'm like, what? Like what? When that train came into view, the Mauritania train. I mean, it was. It's the longest in the world, anyway. It's the longest freight train in the world. But just the sheer scale of how tall the cars
The
are, the
train car.
carriages are. Like you have to climb up, like probably 50 feet or something to get over the top into the into the carriage itself. So yeah. So I got two.
Yeah, unbelievable. So, question number 5, last question, is for people who are just beginning their travel journey and who are interested in traveling, seeing the world, what advice do you have for them?
Well, I think it depends on um, whether you want a medium-term travel goal or a long-term travel goal. Depends on how much money you have to invest in travel and how much time you have. I mean, I was lucky that in my sector, I get 3 to 4 months off a year to travel, so I can therefore um, travel more widely in a shorter space of time. It also depends what your goals are in terms and what what kind of things interest you and stimulate you. Is there a particular continent that you want to focus on, because they're all completely different with
Mhm.
their own, their own attractions and their own vibes? Um, is it that you have a particular focus, like the Seven Wonders of the World, to look at? Um, is it that you have an interest in seeing um, different tribes from all over the world? So fundamentally, it's what is going to what inspires you to want to um, visit the parts of the world that you want to visit. So I mean, obviously, visiting the Seven Wonders of the World was spread across the world, so it gave me some insight into covering multiple continents. Um, uh, so that is kind of what you should be focusing on first. What is the purpose of your travel, um, and what do you want to see, and what do you want to get out of it? Then you uh, really need to look at um, whether you really want to take yourself out of your comfort zone, or whether you want to focus on countries where you feel safe, and that will give you confidence to travel more widely, I think.
Sure.
And then, if you want to then um, look into countries that might be more challenging, do your research about, what to expect, um, and what preparations you should make getting around in those countries. What is safety like? Um, and what might the challenges look like, and how volatile are the countries um, to making your time there as safe and as an experience as possible. There are lots and lots and lots of um, companies out there that will help you get those experiences. Um, I could name lots here. Um, and there are also lots of Facebook groups that you can join to get up to date advice, up to date recommendations for what guides you might use to help you navigate your way around, where to stay, what itineraries to use. So definitely um, think about, um, you know, what what you want from your travel. That's really important. What you want from your travel, what inspires you to travel, what experiences are you looking for? Um, is it a do you is meeting people a big part of your travel, or is the landscape
Hmm.
um, a big part of your travel? For me, it's more landscapes, because that's something that I find that those experiences have given me much more of the all moments,
Yeah.
um, and I will always keep looking for the next all moment. I think that is important about traveling. That it continues to make you, um, it, it continues to keep you hungry for the next awesome adventure. And there are lots of, the world's a massive, massive place. I might be coming to the end of my like UN country counts, but there are 326 countries and territories, so there's a lot left in the world to see. Um, and of course, there are multiple countries that I want to go back and spend more time in and revisit them, and see them in a little bit more detail. Certainly, some of the countries in the Middle East where I couldn't spend the time I wanted to because it just wasn't safe in that moment in time. Um, but those kind of countries tend to have peaks and troughs for when it's the right time to visit and things
Right.
are calm. So sometimes you might have to be flexible, and if you see a period of time where there isn't much going on, get on a
That's the
plane and
time.
go there. That's the time. That's the time to go. Um, but I think travel is one of the most important things in my life. Um, I've been blessed with the travel that I've been able to do up to now, and I see another 30 years of travel ahead of me. So you know, um, I'm going to keep exploring the world, and looking for those experiences that I know are going to keep giving me that wow factor.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining me, Matt. I hope you received a lot out of this episode of Five Good Questions.
Mm.
And just as we wrap up here, I will just turn over to you to just share what's next for you, where is next rather, and are there any closing thoughts you just want to share with the audience?
Well, North Korea is obviously the next, the last piece of the jigsaw puzzle. But this covering 193 countries hasn't been the complete focus of my travel. It's been part of my travel. So I'm not just in and out of countries to tick off a box. I'm traveling, and that's something that is happening and evolving as I go along. Um, what is next? I have a hit list of places I want to see for at least the next 5 years, mainly focused in Europe, and North America. Um, and I will be also going back to countries that I haven't seen. Um, I want to see more of, particularly in the Middle East. But then those countries are again going through obvious issues at the moment, so those might have to be put on the back burner for a while. Um, Reflection, travel because you have a real interest and buzz to see the world, and you have an interest and buzz to meet people from different cultures, and you want to um, see incredible landscapes, and do it because it gives you an inspiration and a buzz. If you're doing travel just because it's a habit, then to me that's not travel. Travel is about a way of life, really, and something that you want to continue to do, and continue to find that next big wow moment.